If you've ever found yourself trapped in endless cycles of preparation, never quite ready to take action, this video will reveal the psychological truth behind your hesitation. Before we dive into these life-changing insights, please smash that like button if you're ready to confront some uncomfortable truths about perfectionism. Hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss content that could transform your mindset. And if you know someone stuck in perfectionist paralysis, share this video with them right now. Behind the almost virtuous shine of perfectionism lies a fear as deep as it is poorly understood, the fear of one's own power. Many believe that being a perfectionist is a sign of discipline, commitment to excellence, or even a high moral standard. Society, after all, tends to applaud those who accept nothing less than the best. But what if all of this is just an illusion? What if behind this relentless pursuit of perfection, there is not a strength, but a weakness, an unconscious strategy to avoid facing something much more frightening, the true potential that each individual carries within themselves? For Carl Jung, perfectionism is not necessarily a virtue. In the view of the Swiss psychiatrist, it can be a sophisticated mechanism of self-sabotage. The human mind, Jung says, creates masks, the so-called personas, to hide parts of the self that it fears to expose to the world. And in many cases, perfectionism is precisely that mask, an impeccable facade that protects the individual not only from external judgment, but above all from the terror of having to take responsibility for their own greatness. Imagine someone who dreams of writing a book, launching a business, or changing careers. This person spends years studying, planning, adjusting every detail. But they never start. They never take the first step because there's always something that isn't good enough yet. The text isn't perfect, the plan isn't solid, the idea still needs adjustments. And so the days, months, and years go by. In this case, perfectionism is not about quality, it is about fear. Fear of failure, of course, but even deeper, fear of success. Because, as Jung observed, success brings with it a painful revelation that one could have done much more, much earlier. Jung understood that the shadow, our unconscious repository of repressed elements, doesn't just contain our flaws and shameful desires. It also harbors our greatest potentials, our unexpressed genius, our capacity for extraordinary achievement. When we keep perfectionism as our guardian, we ensure these powers remain safely locked away, protected from the terrifying responsibility of actually using them. This creates what Jung called a psychological complex, an autonomous cluster of ideas and feelings that operates independently of conscious control. The perfectionist complex becomes like a tyrannical inner critic that whispers, "Not yet, not good enough, one more revision, one more course, one more certification." And the individual, believing they're being responsible and thorough, becomes complicit in their own imprisonment. Think about the psychology of this for a moment. Why would someone be more terrified of success than failure? Because failure, while painful, allows us to remain safely hidden. Failure says, "I tried, but I wasn't good enough," which preserves the comfortable illusion that our potential remains untested and therefore unlimited. But success reveals our actual capabilities and, more terrifyingly, our responsibility to live up to them consistently. Jung observed that modern society has created what he called the cult of perfection, a collective delusion that mistakes preparation for progress, planning for action, and potential for achievement. We live in a world that celebrates the entrepreneur who spent 5 years perfecting their business plan but never launched, the artist who has been working on their masterpiece for a decade, the writer whose novel exists only in endless revisions. But here's where Jung's insights become truly profound. He realized that perfectionism is not just individual self-sabotage, it's a culturally sanctioned form of spiritual death. Because when we refuse to act imperfectly, we refuse to live authentically. We become what Jung called provisional people, individuals who live as if their real life is always about to begin, but never does. The shadow work required to overcome this pattern is both simple and terrifying. It begins with a brutal self-assessment. What am I really avoiding by seeking perfection? For most people, the honest answer is devastating. They're avoiding the possibility of being seen, judged, criticized, or worse, celebrated, and then expected to maintain that level of excellence. They're avoiding the weight of their own gifts. Jung believed that every symptom, every neurosis, every psychological pattern carries within it the seeds of its own transformation. Perfectionism, when properly understood, reveals itself as misdirected excellence. The same drive that creates paralysis through impossible standards can, when redirected, create extraordinary results through persistent, imperfect action. Consider the paradox. Every great work of art, every revolutionary business, every meaningful contribution to human knowledge began as something imperfect. The first draft of every masterpiece was mediocre. The prototype of every life-changing invention was flawed. The initial attempt at every world-changing movement was clumsy and incomplete. Perfection is not the starting point of greatness. It's sometimes the ending point, and even then, only temporarily. The devastating truth is this: perfectionism creates elegant paralysis. You appear busy, always working on something, always improving a detail, but you're avoiding the most dangerous question of all: what am I really capable of? Because the answer to that question is not only grand, it's also frightening. Discovering your own power means looking at lost time, wasted opportunities, and accepting the weight of your own potential. Jung also identified what he called the perfectionist's paradox. The more someone demands perfection, the less likely they are to achieve excellence. This happens because perfectionism focuses on avoiding mistakes rather than creating value. It prioritizes protection over production, safety over significance. The perfectionist becomes so afraid of doing something wrong that they never do anything meaningful at all. The psychological cost of this pattern compounds over time. Jung observed that unexpressed creativity doesn't simply disappear. It turns inward and becomes destructive. The energy that should be flowing outward into the world through work, art, relationships, and contributions instead becomes trapped, manifesting as anxiety, depression, chronic dissatisfaction, and what Jung called the unlived life syndrome. This is why so many high-functioning perfectionists appear successful from the outside while feeling empty inside. They've mastered the art of looking productive while avoiding the vulnerability of actually producing something that matters. They've become experts at sophisticated procrastination, disguising fear as discernment and paralysis as preparation. But Jung also showed us the way out, and it's both simpler and more challenging than most people expect. The path isn't about lowering standards or accepting mediocrity. It's about redirecting perfectionist energy toward what Jung called conscious suffering. This means choosing the discomfort of imperfect action over the comfortable agony of endless preparation. The process Jung outlined involves what he called holding the tension of opposites, learning to act while accepting imperfection, to strive for excellence while embracing the inevitable failures along the way. This requires what he termed moral courage. Not the courage to do what's right, but the courage to do what's real. Through individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of ourselves, we can transform perfectionism from a prison into fuel for authentic action. This requires courage. The courage to start before you're ready, to show imperfect work, to risk failure and success equally. It means learning to see mistakes not as proof of inadequacy, but as data points on the path to mastery. The transformation isn't about becoming careless or lowering standards. It's about redirecting the perfectionist's natural attention to detail away from endless preparation and toward continuous improvement through action. Instead of perfecting before starting, the recovered perfectionist learns to start before perfecting, then improve through iteration, feedback, and real-world testing. Jung believed that this shift from perfectionist paralysis to what he called conscious action represents one of the most important psychological developments a person can make. It's the difference between living as a critic of your own unlived life and becoming the author of an imperfect but authentic existence. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of perfectionism is how it masquerades as virtue while serving as vice. Society rewards perfectionist tendencies with praise, recognition, and social approval. We're told that attention to detail, high standards, and refusing to settle are admirable qualities, and they can be when they serve creation rather than prevention, when they enhance action rather than replace it. Jung identified what he called the perfectionist's trap within the trap, the way this pattern becomes self-reinforcing through external validation. The perfectionist receives just enough praise for their high standards and attention to detail that they never question whether these qualities are actually producing meaningful results. They become addicted to the process of perfecting rather than the outcome of completing. This creates what Jung termed psychological inflation. The ego becomes so identified with its image as someone with high standards that it cannot tolerate the humiliation of producing anything less than perfect. The perfectionist's identity becomes dependent on never being seen as mediocre, average, or, God forbid, wrong. This identity prison becomes more important than any actual achievement. The tragic irony is that perfectionism often produces the very mediocrity it seeks to avoid. By never finishing anything, never launching any project, never putting work into the world where it can be tested and improved, the perfectionist guarantees that their actual impact remains perpetually average. They achieve a kind of magnificent mediocrity, impressive-looking preparation that never translates into real-world results. Jung observed that this pattern is particularly destructive for naturally gifted individuals. Those with genuine talent often become the most paralyzed by perfectionism because their potential feels so vast that any single expression of it seems inadequate. They sense they could create something extraordinary, and this very sensing becomes the enemy of creating anything at all. The psychological work of recovering from perfectionism, according to Jung, requires what he called creative rebellion, a deliberate choice to disappoint the perfectionist voice inside. This means setting artificially low standards, celebrating good enough results, and learning to find satisfaction in completion rather than perfection. One of Jung's most profound insights was that perfectionism is ultimately a spiritual problem disguised as a practical one. The perfectionist believes they're serving excellence, but they're actually serving fear. They believe they're being responsible, but they're actually avoiding responsibility. They believe they're preparing for greatness, but they're actually preventing it. The spiritual dimension of this work involves what Jung called surrendering the God complex, the unconscious belief that we must be perfect to be worthy of taking up space in the world. This God complex whispers that unless we can guarantee extraordinary results, we have no right to try. It's a form of psychological grandiosity that paradoxically keeps us playing small. The path forward isn't about becoming less ambitious or caring less about quality. It's about redirecting perfectionist energy toward what Jung called embodied excellence. Excellence that exists in the real world through imperfect action rather than in the imagination through perfect planning. This means learning to see perfection not as a prerequisite for action, but as a byproduct of persistent, iterative improvement. The question isn't whether you're good enough, it's whether you're brave enough to stop hiding behind the mask of perfectionism and finally discover what you're truly capable of achieving when you dare to begin before you're ready. If this video opened your eyes to the hidden psychology of perfectionism, show your support by hitting that like button. Subscribe if you're ready to dive deeper into Jung's revolutionary insights. And please share this with anyone you know who might be trapped in perfectionist paralysis. In the comments below, I want you to tell me, what's one project or dream you've been perfecting instead of launching? Let's bring these shadows into the light together. Your vulnerability might be exactly what someone else needs to finally take their first imperfect step toward greatness.